City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. City Club is where civic-minded people come together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm Greg McPherson, president of City Club. Members and guests are gathered today at the Sentinel Hotel, along with all of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners enables us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. Our media partner is Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are AARP of Oregon, Iberdrola Renewables, and Providence Health and Services. And we are delighted to welcome our newest sponsors, McKinley Irvin and Uber. Please join me in showing our appreciation for all of them. At next week's Friday Forum, Metro Council President Tom Hughes will discuss change, challenge, and the urban growth boundary with Oregonian reporter Anna Griffin. Please join us here at the Sentinel for this important topic. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. As always, we will be live tweeting today's program. You can follow along and join the conversation using the hashtag PDXCityClub. Later in today's program, Linda Baker will facilitate a Q&A session with those in the live audience. Asking questions at the microphone is a benefit of City Club membership, but anyone in the live audience here at the Sentinel may write a question on one of the index cards found at the center of the tables. Hold the card up and City Club staff will collect them before or during the Q&A session. And now for today's program. The opening of the Orange Line last Saturday marked the triumphant completion of Oregon's biggest public transit project of the decade and leaves us with an intriguing question. What's next for public transportation in the Portland region? A public transit system has a number of purposes. It can be an economic development engine, an essential tool for working Oregonians, a critical piece of affordable housing and anti-displacement strategies, and more. So what do we as a region want from our public transit system? How do we ensure that we hear from all stakeholders, and how do we build the political will to support a world-class system? Neil McFarlane, General Manager of TriMet, will get us started by laying out TriMet's vision for the future. He is a longtime veteran of TriMet capital projects and has led the agency since 2010. This will be followed by a panel discussion with McFarlane, Karmen Fore, Transportation Policy Advisor to Governor Brown, and Vivian Satterfield, Deputy Director at OPAL Environmental Justice. We'll conclude with a Q&A from the City Club audience. Oregon Business Editor Linda Baker will moderate the discussion. Please welcome our panel to Friday Forum.
Well, thank you, Greg. I'm very, very, very pleased to be here to kick off this important conversation about the future of transit in this great city, in this great region. Many of you know that TriMet plays a really big role in keeping our region moving and our economy growing. We deliver 100 million rides in a year. We're 24th in population, but ranked 9th in per capita transit ridership. As Congressman Blumenauer says, we outbox our weight class. But even with that, I think we can all see what's happening on our roads and highways. The recession hid our mobility problems, but now they're back with a vengeance. We're also seeing dramatic growth in demographic shifts and even more dramatic technological changes. So I really appreciate the City Club Forum as a great place to see how we harness these trends going forward. But let me pause here for a moment and touch on what a difference 3.5 years makes. The last time I was here was February 2012, and I laid out a relatively bleak picture for TriMet. Unemployment was high, and the recession had taken a toll on our operating resources. But the greatest threat facing TriMet was whether we were going to be controlled by our legacy healthcare costs, or make the changes so we could deliver on our mission to provide the region's transit service. Fast forward 3 years and the picture is very different. TriMet today is a much stronger a much better agency than it was the last time I was here. We negotiated a labor agreement while fair to employees has resulted in changes to our benefits that's put us on a long-term sustainable financial footing. We adopted a long-range strategic financial plan that guides us as we make real progress on our legacy pension and healthcare responsibilities while expanding service. We're the first transit district of its kind to receive a AAA bond rating from Moody's. Again, another first. We've added back all the service hours we cut from the recession. We'll soon launch a new bus line between Tualatin and Sherwood to connect the growing jobs in the area. And we've worked with businesses and the community to develop a 20-year vision for the future of transit. We call these our service enhancement plans, which map out improvements in every neighborhood of the region. And this last Wednesday, with the backdrop of a growing economy and a close working relationship with our business community, our board of directors approved new revenues that will allow us to expand bus service and provide more connections to jobs, education, and community services. So yes, we are growing again. But I want to shift here to pause for a moment and point out a significant shift in our region. While we have a long history of hearing from businesses with so-called white-collar jobs, those 8-to-5 jobs that are typically located near good transit service, we've all long seen real estate brokers advertise nearby transit service to entice buyers. But here's what's changing. Now we're hearing from manufacturers who've located their businesses based on available land, but now realize they need transit service to get their employees to their jobs. So we're working, for example, with the Hillsborough Chamber to connect those workers who are employed in those expanding manufacturing jobs in North Hillsborough using innovative shuttle services. We've already have 2 of these innovative shuttle services operating in important places, Forest Grove and Tualatin, but we want to do much more. The head of Centro Cultural of Washington County, Maria Caballero Rubio, testified in front of our board this week in favor of expanding transit. She said they work with people who can't afford a car insurance, gas, maybe can't even get a license. So they rely on public transit for everything, to get to work, to get groceries, and take the child to the clinic. We know that these same needs exist in neighborhoods around our district, neighborhoods such as Cully, Rockwood, and mid-Multnomah County. We're focused on improving services in these areas and to connect them to nearby job centers. That's a key part of our future. But you may have also noticed what happened a week ago. The fantastic new Orange Line and its one-of-a-kind, no-auto Tillicum crossing opened up on time and under budget. We saw 40,000 people ride the Orange Line on opening day, and a truncated service day at that. Tens of thousands crossed the beautiful Tillicum crossing and explored the communities along the Orange Line. It's more transit and improved transit at a time that we need it most. Now, I say all of this not to crow, although maybe just a little, but to make the point that 3 years ago, the challenges facing transit looked very daunting. But with partnerships, collaboration, innovation, and persistence, along with a growing economy, we are in a very positive situation today to look ahead. But it's clear that the region's transportation future is filled with challenges that are also very daunting. Consider, we're expecting the equivalent of 4 new Hillsboroughs. That's 400,000 residents and 260,000 jobs over the next 20 years. Congestion is growing. Freight is being impacted. Experts predict that without new investments in transit and roads, congestion will triple over the next 25 years. But there's a solution. The 2014 Portland Business Alliance study found that investing in transit and roads would reduce that impact by almost half, while generating nearly $1.1 billion in economic benefits and more than 8,300 jobs per year by 2040. That's a return of $2.40 for every dollar invested. And transit's a very important part of that. Our region has tied its future to transit. Look at the city's many apartment developments or retail and commercial developments underway. We're hardwired now to create livable communities along good transit. But while we're talking transit here, we cannot forget that we're tied to a multimodal transportation system. And we have a roadmap for the future in this region, but also many, many challenges ahead for both transit and transportation in general in the region. The federal government is, well, the federal government. They recently passed the 37th temporary extension to the Federal Transportation Act because they can't agree on how to move forward. And despite the yeoman work of folks like Karmen Fore from our governor's office, the state hasn't been able to craft a package that can gain the supermajority needed to pass tax measures, although they came tantalizingly close this year. Our regional transportation plan is woefully underfunded for all modes of travel, whether it's roads, transit, bikes, or pedestrians. Meanwhile, for the first time in 40 years, the region has no major federally funded rail project ready to move forward to construction. Now, despite all this, personally, I'm optimistic. Just as TriMet overcame its most pressing challenges, I think the region can as well. And the recipe is the same: partnerships, collaboration, innovation, and persistence. We need to be persistent in working at the state and federal level to support the passage of new funding for all the elements of the transportation system. Again, that's roads, transit, freight, bike, and pedestrian facilities. But you should consider also that other communities are not waiting for state and federal funding. Look at Seattle, Denver, Phoenix, just to name a few. They're stepping up and investing billions in their transit and transportation systems. Our transportation challenges can't wait, and we need local attention now. Recognize also that our region has greater needs and, frankly, needs more attention than most all other areas of the state. While we look forward to working with our federal and state partners, we also need to look for our own funding solutions right here in this region. We also need to pursue innovation in the transportation realm, including creating our first bus rapid transit system along the OPAL Division corridor in East Portland. We need to continue our leadership using information technology to better inform travel choices and make optimal use of the infrastructure we have. It means tying together transit service with new transportation systems such as Lyft, Uber, and bike share. These could play an important role in making that last mile connection for transit riders. I now want to paint a little picture for you. Travel along the Orange Line today and you'll see major investment in business expansion, which translates to more jobs. You'll see new and improved roads, sidewalks, and bike facilities, helping create vibrant neighborhoods. Take that vision and think about how it can transform another transportation corridor. The Southwest Corridor from downtown Portland, along Southwest Barber Boulevard and I-5 to Tigard and Tualatin, is ready for more significant investment in transit and roads. The real problem in this corridor is traffic. It's backed up, often at a standstill, often for hours a day. We're coming together as a region with solutions to invest in both roads and transit to keep this corridor moving. Now, if all of this sounds daunting, it is. But we've done it before, actually many times before. And we've done it using the same model of partnership, collaboration, innovation, and persistence. After all, 40,000 people experienced our sixth MAX line last Saturday because of that model of coming together. We've used that approach for the last 40 years, and it has made us one of the most enviable places to live in the country. Again, the result is 100 million rides a year, 9th in the country in per capita ridership, and it's why U.S. Transportation Secretary Fox calls us a model for the nation. What makes this region different is that we work together collaboratively, we work together to get to yes, and we know that it's not one travel option versus another, that we need them all. So let me leave you with 3 final thoughts. First, we have a long history of making this a great community, and we'll continue that with all of your help and support. Second, while we continue to pursue state and federal funding, our region also needs to step up and make the investments to keep us moving and our economy growing. And finally, think big and then think bigger. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. I'm Linda Baker, and I am the editor of Oregon Business Magazine, and I'd like to welcome and introduce our other 2 panelists, Karmen Fore, the Governor's Transportation and Sustainable Communities Policy Advisor, and Vivian Satterfield, Deputy Director for OPAL Environmental Justice. Welcome. We just heard from Neil, who gave us a relatively optimistic assessment of TriMet and transit going forward. My first question is for Vivian. OPAL has a history of disagreeing with TriMet policies and practices. Are you equally optimistic about TriMet and transit going forward? And how would you like to see TriMet take advantage of the improved economy and restored service to create the kind of transit system that we would like to see in this city?
Thank you very much for the question. I think that OPAL's actions and what we've been able to do have absolutely brought us to the forefront to be a voice for riders, for everyday riders, and we'll continue to do so. Some of the improvements that we've had is, now we can all enjoy a 2.5-hour transfer. That's due to our advocacy, and so we absolutely believe in all modes of transportation. I myself actually just rode my bicycle across the Tillicum Bridge for the first time last night and spent so much time looking up at how beautiful it was that I was scared I was going to get lost on my way back home. The reality is that a majority of boardings on TriMet are still made on the bus. Over 60% of boardings are still made on the bus. And for low-income people and for transit-dependent riders, that's their lifeline to opportunity. It's true, Neil mentioned that we don't have a rail project in the pipeline, but the Powell Division Bus Rapid Transit is a perfect example of how we can create a project that not only attracts choice riders to the system to help boost ridership, but also really gets transit-dependent people where they need to go in a very good way. Improvements like bus jump lanes, signal prioritization is going to be able to move people more efficiently more than ever. And I believe from a TriMet survey itself, it said that riders care the most about efficiency when they're riding. So that's absolutely an improvement, and we're excited to be a partner in moving forward in that vision.
Thank you. Neil also referred to the failed transportation package, and Karmen, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what legislative changes you see coming down the pike, both at the state and the federal level, that might impact local transit systems.
That's a big question, and thank you City Club for hosting a forum on this important topic. The legislature was not successful in passing a package, but where they were successful, and I think phenomenally innovative and deserve credit, is thinking in a creative way about how we can add funding for transit. In Oregon, we have a state constitutionally restricted highway trust fund. So when we all go to the gas station and buy gas for our vehicles, the voters of Oregon have voted in years past and put in our Constitution. Those funds then go toward, out of the state gas tax, our state road, bridges, and highways. And that has made it very difficult in a state without a sales tax to figure out how, at the state level, can we provide additional funding for transit in communities all across Oregon. It's difficult to compete in the general fund environment when it's primarily there for education, law enforcement, human services, things of that nature. Where the group of legislators that came together during the session thought about looking at the payroll tax for those transit districts that use the payroll tax. So TriMet is one, Lane Transit District in Eugene Springfield is another. In not only having the business tax portion, what about if we do it at a phenomenally low rate, do a similar tax on individuals, so everyone in the community is participating financially in some way, in a robust way in our local transportation systems. I believe for this transit district, for TriMet, that would have provided around $70 million for TriMet. And what legislators are focused in on, I think is where you were hitting on, Vivian, is that core bus service. It's been a vexing problem for transit districts across the country and here in Oregon as well, that when we have transit systems that are dependent upon income taxes, and you have to have receipt of those income taxes coming in to pay for your service, in the good days, you're doing great. You have funds to pay for core service for your buses. But when the economy downturns, what happens? We see it all over the country, and it was no different here in the Portland area. It hits core service, and that ends up meaning you cut bus routes and you hurt the people you want to be serving the most, especially during those tough economic times. So I think going forward, looking at the state level, you have a body of people that are thinking creatively about how we potentially can enhance funding for transit. We have to crack the nut beyond the payroll tax for other communities that don't use that as a funding source. We certainly have connectivity issues in rural and suburban Oregon that we have to address as well. But I think we are in a moment of time with people across both sides of the aisle and in both chambers that are interested and willing to sit down, roll up their sleeves, and think through how we can enhance funding for transit. On the federal side, and I'll be brief, at the federal government level, they're working on reauthorization bills right now. As Neil mentioned, and having recently left Congress myself a couple years ago, it's likely we'll still be in a period of extensions for a while. A couple Congresses ago where I worked, we were looking at a wholesale cut of transit funding altogether in the House. We are not in an environment right now where Congress is looking to cut funding for transit that it provides altogether. But I think communities like this one do need to step up and continue to be vocal about transit being a priority for a myriad of needs, and that federal support is essential to help pay for things like buses and other core services that the federal government provides to communities to augment how we operate our transit districts across the country.
Thank you. Back to your point about everyone needing to roll up their sleeves and look to innovation in terms of coming up with new funding mechanisms. Neil or Vivian, can you comment on that? Where can we, what kind of sources might we look to for these kinds of innovations? And let me just add to that, we're seeing some innovation come out of the city of Portland when it comes to new funding mechanisms for affordable housing. And I'm wondering if we might look to the same sources to find solutions for transit funding.
Well, I'm afraid I don't have a silver bullet sort of answer to that question. As Karmen noted, there are a lot of restrictions in the Oregon tax system. Most transit systems around the nation actually refer to a sales tax as their major funding source. Candidly, that's a regressive funding source, so I think we're actually a little ahead of the game. But we also know we can't rely entirely to all the needs in the future on the employer payroll tax that we currently do. We've been very, I think, well served by our region's employers who have really stepped up and have been good players, a little grumpy at times about it, but I think good players about recognizing the need of getting their employees to work, and actually the role transit plays in reducing congestion and allowing freight to move on our regional highways. So I think one thing that I would just say is that I gotta give, again, I mentioned this in my remarks, but great credit to our board of directors who stood up and authorized an increase in the payroll tax this last week. And that will phase in over 10 years, provide about $4.3 million of new service aimed at primarily buses. We'll do a little more light rail service, not capital construction, but service with that increment. And over 10 years, that will, in today's dollars, equate to about $43 million of new bus service. So that's quite a dramatic improvement, I think, in terms of the growth of the system in the future. I think, again, I think the mechanism that the state legislature, the proposed package came up with was really quite ingenious, and I think it's actually quite fair when you begin to think about it. So I think that's one very hopeful point. We really don't have a whole lot of other mechanisms in this region, but we have relied a lot on partnership funding, where we've been able to work with local jurisdictions. For example, you might know that the City of Portland contributes about 40% of the operating costs of the Portland streetcar, recognizing the streetcar's role as a development tool. And so more partnerships like that are, I think, also an important possibility.
It's great to hear a talk about service, and of course any investment in service is something that we absolutely support. It goes directly back to the people who use the system. The most important folks are the riders. It's interesting to note that Oregon is one of the nation's leaders when it comes to capital investments, and yet we rank under, really at the bottom of the list when it comes to investment in service, less than 3% for service, whereas the national average is 24%. So while I too don't have solutions about how to bring more money to our system, that's something that we're in agreement on. We need to do that. We want to look at different ways of how to spend the money that we already have. Perhaps TriMet should not be subsidizing the Portland streetcar. We're currently subsidizing West riders too at a rate that's much higher than here in Portland. These are all questions, and we should have all the options on the table so we can come to a meaningful solution that works for all.
Neil, how do you respond to her claim about the streetcar?
We run a system, and the system is integrated, and there are parts of the system that are obviously much less heavily subsidized than others. But the overall system is what's important, and being able to provide great service to everyone, I think, is really our goal. So for example, on the Portland streetcar, I think it's actually a great deal for transit riders. The streetcars currently operates at a cost efficiency ratio that's really aligned with some of our best bus routes. It's providing great mobility for people. And when you begin to look at the service areas, there are a lot of low-income people that live in the central area that rely on the streetcar. So I think we again have to recognize that this system. The other thing that I would note, and a lot of people don't sort of recognize this, but TriMet does have multiple missions that we have to balance. So one is that we need to also provide excellent service for seniors and people with disabilities. And that can be expensive at times. That is heavily subsidized. But it's absolutely essential to keep those individuals active and mobile part of our society. Our Lyft service, our door-to-door Lyft service, provides about 1 million rides a year. And it's expensive. But it's absolutely essential for that population to be an active part of our society. We have other missions, getting employees to work and customers to businesses, assisting with congestion, as I noted. But also, an important mission, and this is where streetcar also comes in, is helping to shape the development of a region so that we don't cause the sprawl that would see the city grow into our treasured farms and forest lands, and that we actually help to keep our urban growth boundary strong. And that's a very important role of TriMet as well.
Thank you. And to all the OPB listeners who are just joining us, I'm Linda Baker, editor of Oregon Business Magazine. I am here at the Friday Forum City Club, talking about the future of transit with Neil McFarlane, TriMet's general manager, Vivian Satterfield, deputy director for OPAL Environmental Justice, and Karmen Fore, the governor's transportation policy advisor. I'd like to ask a question about private sector transportation companies. I think we see in many cities, in many other countries, that private bus companies work in tandem with public transit agencies to help expand service. We also live in a time where private companies, one of which is a sponsor of tonight's event, Uber, are radically reshaping urban transportation. I'd like to ask all of you the question, what role do you see the private sector playing in helping improve and expand transit options in Portland? And how do you retain the public in public transit if private sector companies do move in?
Well, I might just note that from TriMet's perspective, we actually see great opportunity in partnerships with firms like Uber and Lyft. But I think your question pointed out the dilemma, which is that we have to make sure that we're serving those that frankly don't have the credit card that can support those services. So, but we do see the need and are working on the tools to begin to integrate our services so that if an individual wanted to take the red line from the airport to the Beaverton Transit Center, perhaps an Uber or Lyft car could meet them at the transit center to get them the rest of the way home. You can begin to imagine how that could really make a whole series of origin destination options available to the public that don't exist now. So we see that as a great advantage, but it doesn't help everybody. We certainly agree with that. And the other thing that I'd say is that we do use, for example, private contractors to provide that Lyft service. That's all contracted service. And we actually have a great experience with that, actually providing, I think, very high quality service. But it's something that we have to monitor as a public agency to make sure that that quality is maintained. So I don't see, frankly, the substitute of private companies related to the 40-foot bus service that's most ubiquitous at TriMet in this region in the near-term future. But I do think that at the edge, the private sectors can actually help glue together some mobility options for people in this region.
I have yet to see a Bus Riders Unite member show up to a member meeting in an Uber. So based on that, you know, when we talk about transportation, you really talk about access. That's what it's about. And for low-income folks and people who are dependent on public transit, it's actually a lifeline to opportunity. When I tell people that transportation is a human right, sometimes I get confused looks back, but it's true. Transportation is a civil right, but in an urban environment, it is a human right. If you cut off people's ability to have mobility and access, that limits the realm of opportunity and limits their ability to prosper in a region. So we absolutely believe in the service enhancement plans, especially on the east side, where there hasn't been great transit service and where most of our members are currently living due to displacement and gentrification pressures in the inner city. The transportation network that we have now and the expanded transportation network that we're looking forward to having is essential.
So I agree a lot with both Vivian and Neil have said, and I think if we look at other communities that may, actually have even more robust transit service available and may even be more congested than our community here, you can really see how Lyft and Ubers complement service options for people living in communities, and part of it's about choice. I think part of it is also that last mile service where in some communities it is a real vexing problem. So having more options in a community I think is helpful going down the line. But what I think even in urban congested areas, that core fundamental service is critical, and people really rely on that ride showing up on time, getting you to where you need to go, and it's a ride that's affordable. I don't foresee that going away because of what's coming into augmenting on the driver's side of choice for people who want to get around other than their own personal car.
One follow-up to that question. So are you prepared for the inevitable Uber-style invasion of a bus company that might come in, and a company that doesn't have to hire union drivers and doesn't have to pay pension wages?
I don't see that as a threat in the near term. Number one, recognize what we were talking about related to resources. So our service is heavily subsidized, and so I think it's a very, very far reach for the private sector to sort of take that over, if you will. Taking advantage of the services they offer, I think, is important. And again, with information services and technology, I think we can be in a position to glue together the transit system with some of these other alternatives to the benefit of really all of our riders.
And I think to that point, it's would that bus service be economically viable? And we certainly already do have private sector bus operating in intercity service from point-to-point service from one community to another. So that's not a new thing. It's would it work in an urban setting? And I think to Neil's point correctly, when a community has come together and said we want to subsidize transit, does that private provider compete with, and then they're able to provide the same level of service? But we certainly do have a lot in this state and across the country, private sector bus operators working now that really do enhance connectivity for a lot of folks who are trying to get from one place to another.
Going forward, TriMet has or does get a lot of flack from the press, from state auditors, from OPAL. Going forward, what is your role? What kind of role do you see, or what kind of partnership do you see taking place with organizations like OPAL to improve accountability and transparency at TriMet?
Well, first of all, I would note that it's been some time now since the completion of the Secretary of State's audit. Governor Brown, before she became governor, oversaw that audit, and we have completely implemented every single recommendation that came out of that. And the only ones that don't have a complete check are those that are continuing, that will really are ongoing activities. So the other thing that I would say is that we are absolutely not defensive as an agency. We really are looking for ways to continuously improve and to do better in all these regards. And I would also say, if you want to look at a model for transparency, look at our website and the Accountability Center, where we actually have our budgets, our audits, independent financial reports, everything, ridership reports, all of our performance reports are there, ready and accessible and available for the public. I'd also say that we do a lot right now to reach out to our customers, to our business partners, and we can always do more, and we can always do better in that regard. And we would actually love to have, frankly, I think, a more positive relation than we've had with OPAL moving forward. But I guess, again, I would also say that we reach out with onboard customer surveys on a regular basis. We talk to our customers on a regular basis. We've increased the social media associated with communicating with our customers and our stakeholders. We have regular public meetings. Our board has a public forum at the outset of its every meeting, on and on. We do a lot in that regard. We can always do more, and we can always do better, and we're anxious to learn from the community in that regard.
What OPAL and Bus Riders Unite has been agitating for the past few years, pardon me, is really for a change and a shift in the culture at TriMet to one that really values and lifts up the voices of everyday riders. We call them the experts of the transit rider experience, right? If you ride transit every day, you're going to have a much better understanding of what it is than someone who doesn't use it. Most recently, the appointment process, that's how the board of directors at TriMet is appointed. It's appointed by the governor. That is very far removed from the riders and experiences here in Portland. We were happy to see that there was actually 2 women recently appointed to the board. Women make up the majority of frequent transit users. We want to see more and more reflection of the people who use transit service every single day. Now, I realize that even though a dream would be to have a transit-dependent person on the TriMet board, that might be a stretch. There's some technical expertise and a lot of time that takes in going into being a TriMet board member. But any way that we can see more representation for the riders and people who use the system day in and day out to drop their kids off at childcare, to make it to a shift that's starting at work, that's what we're agitating towards, and that's a slow culture shift, and we're willing to work with TriMet on that. I think that one way we can continue to improve that is through the newly created Transit Equity Advisory Committee, TEAC. We currently have 1 representative who is transit dependent, who happens to be Bus Riders Unite's vice chair. It'd be great to see that Transit TEAC committee be formalized and also have a board liaison to show the true commitment to riders' experiences.
Thank you. So how bus ridership has stagnated, and it sounds, as we discussed, as we have been talking about, you have a more optimistic outlook, and you have restored much of the service that was cut during the recession. How do you make riding the bus as sexy as riding light rail. Many cities emulated our light rail transportation lines. How do we build a bus system that will inspire other cities to emulate our approach to mass transit, to the bus in particular?
Well, let me perhaps start, and there may be some other ideas from the panelists as well, but the first thing that I would say is over the last 5 years, we've paid enormous attention to the bus system. We have added time to schedules so that the buses are more reliable. We've updated the fleet, and this year we'll actually be meeting our objective of an average age of 8 years for our buses. And so if you were to compare our fleet 5 years ago with where it is today, it's an entirely different and much more modern and up-to-date fleet. 100% low floor, 100% air conditioned. So we think we're meeting the needs of our riders by doing that. But I also think that we have to continually put money into schedules and reliability. One of the challenges of the bus system is that it doesn't have a fixed guideway. And so it's on the streets and the highways with everybody else. And so when everybody else enjoys that congestion, so does the bus. The difference for us is that means we have to pay a driver a little extra to keep that same route on schedule. And so that's a regular investment that we have to make every year in the bus system. So we have to keep up with that. And candidly, during the Great Recession, some of that slipped, became not quite the priority that we know that it should be because of the shortage of resources. So moving forward, our plan is to both continue to maintain the current bus system schedules, address issues of crowding that do occur, and also continue to grow the system in other areas. As you noted, we've restored all the hours that were cut during the Great Recession. Our frequent service lines now run 15 minutes all day, very wide spans, Saturday and Sunday. So we have, I think, a very enviable level of service. We now need to spread that to some other parts of the region, as Vivian noted earlier.
Absolutely. Restoring bus service that was cut during the recession is paramount. I'm also quite excited about bus rapid transit, which will help solve perhaps some of those issues with crowding and being stuck in traffic. Nobody likes that, especially not bus riders. So I think the more we can do to have priority lanes, signal prioritization, jump lanes, things like that, that'll attract more people, more choice riders to our system and bolster ridership overall. But you know, I ride the bus every day, and I don't think there's anything unsexy about it.
Hard to beat that response.
Sexy and bus. There's a great, Lane Transit District is a great model for how bus rapid transit can work, and for this community, if you want to see how great that system is, go there and see the changes it's made for that community. It's a great option and another tool in the toolkit at the federal level when we were looking at how do you provide more choices in communities so you can get more robust transit in. And some of communities aren't like the Portland area where you sort of had rail baked into the system, something you could take advantage to. We had Rust Belt cities where they're very crowded, dense, gridded. How do you put a transit system back into those communities, or in areas like Eugene, Springfield, where you see the growth coming and they need that system now, not after the fact that the congestion has arrived. So it's a great tool in our toolkit to add more choices for folks. I think they hit on, it may not be sexy, but it's frequency and service and nice buses. And part of where I think you do have, and I think where the region, Oregon, did better in terms of that capital, those dollars coming from the federal government, we used to have it as a competitive grant. It's been formalized now, which is not, again, a very unsexy term, but I think both TriMet and Lane Transit District just competed phenomenally well next to their peers on those grant funds, and as a consequence, this region enjoyed nicer buses as a consequence, and that's a big key in it. Being able to provide attractive, nice buses for folks to ride on matters as well.
What cities do you hold up as transit role models? Cities anywhere in the country, and why? Excuse me, anywhere in the world, and why?
I'll make a plug because my parents live in Shanghai, and so that's a city I travel to quite frequently, and I am so impressed by their system because they're moving massive amounts of people. I once went the wrong way during rush hour and quickly realized I had to turn and just go where everyone else was going. Had so many riders, but I'm truly impressed by the efficiency of it, and despite the chaos and madness of the traffic, that everyone's getting to where they need to go because the frequency of that service, especially the bus and the rail lines, is so robust.
One plug I'll make, which is in our neighborhood, is our neighbor city of Seattle, which has just approved a very major expansion of bus service with city funding. Frankly, the city stepped up and expanded the King County transit system, as well as some very major capital projects that are underway. Again, I think the desperation of traffic congestion in that region has caused a major expansion of transit service, because I think the city is beginning to realize there's no other way for people to get around than to begin to expand the transit system. And so we're going to see some dramatic
Neil,
things there.
And I'm very sorry to cut you off. It looks like it's time to open up the discussion to the Q&A. Thank you very much. We are now going to open up the discussion to questions from the audience. If you have written a question on an index card, please hold it up high so that City Club staff can collect it from you. As always, we invite members to the microphone to ask their question. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a benefit of City Club membership, and membership is open to everyone. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member.
Hi, Dave Barenberg, City Club member. First, thank you, Neil, and to all who worked on the Orange Line. It's not just a wonderful transportation project, it's really a point of pride now for the community. I live in Southwest, and I'm suffering from a bad case of rapid transit envy. So can you speak a little bit to the vision and the status of rapid transit in the Southwest Corridor?
Absolutely. Currently, under the leadership of Metro, the region is beginning to look at alternatives for rapid transit development, or high-capacity transit as it's known in that biz, for the Barber I-5 corridor between downtown Portland, Tigard, and Tualatin. As I mentioned in my remarks, currently a number of alternative routes are under consideration, as well as the mode, and that could be bus rapid transit or light rail currently under consideration. This is at an early stage. I'd say it's just a little bit above what I'd call the gleam in the eye stage of transit planning. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of defining the alternatives, making some decisions, and then the hard part of coming up with a financing plan. But I do hope that that will come together in the next couple of years. So hopefully, before you and I are old and gray, or older and grayer in my case, we'll see some improvements in that corridor.
Hello, I'm Roberta Palmer, City Club member. It seems like part of the revenue puzzle would be for the city to enact a tax on served food and drink. We're a major food destination here in Portland. I mean, the food scene is exploding. It would mainly tax tourists and the rich, and even a rate of 2 or 3% would bring in a lot of revenue. And so, and it's not unique to Oregon. We have Ashland and Yachts that do that. And so what is wrong with it? What am I missing? Why is that not an obvious thing that we should have been doing years ago?
I don't know. I think really going forward on looking at revenue, I think policymakers are going to want a broad array of options to look at. So part of it is, what are you raising it? Where is it going to? And is it robust enough? Are you going to raise the revenue necessary to do the thing you intend to do? As those conversations go forward, I think adding those ideas to the mix are going to be important. The other screen that I think I see policymakers look at is the viability. Is a politically viable option, and you want to weigh the best way for us to go forward is to have a bunch of options that they can weigh one against the other and see what's going to be the best long-standing revenue tool to help enhance transit service.
The only thing I might add is that Oregonians have sort of proven themselves to be somewhat allergic to sales taxes, and so we'd have some education to do, I think, in that regard.
Next question.
Bill Dickey, City Club member. Two questions, breaking the rules. One, how does the cost of fuel affect TriMet's budget at the moment? Does TriMet buy its fuel way in advance, or do you buy it on the local market? And then two, does TriMet actually cross the Columbia River, or does it just dead end at the river? And does C-Trans, is that somehow connected to TriMet in some way, or because it comes over, but it comes from Clark County?
So the first question about fuel, TriMet enters into a long-term contract based on a bid that the provider provides a certain cost per gallon in addition to the Portland fuel price, Portland Harbor fuel price, which is an index that's regularly published. So while we don't enter into long-term fuel contracts in terms of the price, we enter into supply. So there are suppliers who are willing to provide that at a certain margin on an ongoing basis. But I would tell you that right now that's a very positive point for TriMet's budget. We're literally saving about $1 million a year last I looked compared to where our budget was because of the reduced cost of diesel fuel right now. So that's a good point in the budget. Related to the regional connection with Clark County, our service does stop at Hayden Island, and right now Clark County does provide direct service to downtown Portland, to parts of East Portland, actually connecting to the Red Line at Park Rose, and actually also provides a connection directly at the Delta Park station along the Yellow Line. So there are a number of connections that C-Trans makes in order to provide good mobility for Clark County residents into the central area. We also coordinate with C-Tran right now in terms of development of our electronic fare system. So we'll be working with them to have, if you will, a ubiquitous fare system for the region as a whole. We do the same with the Portland streetcar as well.
Thank you. I am now going to read a question from one of the index cards. One key to sustained business vitality is to constantly recruit the next generation of loyal customers. What is TriMet doing to build loyalty and enthusiasm with the under 25 crowd as riders and taxpayers?
Well, I might mention a couple things. One is that we've been really pleased to enter into a partnership with Portland's public schools and the city of Portland to provide free passes to Portland public school students. And I would also note that the board policy on that actually would encourage other school districts to participate in that same kind of partnership. And we'd love to work with them to begin to expand that program. And actually what we find is that when the Portland public school students graduate from high school, they are so familiar with using public transit that it becomes second nature. And so that's been a very positive program, and we think a lot of it. But the other thing is to make it easy and maybe a little bit fun. And so to that extent, we've developed things like the Fare app with a local firm, Globe Sherpa, developed an innovative fare application that allows people to buy fares, frankly, on their smartphone. And that and continued social media connections, I think, are all part of that picture.
Youth Pass is a fantastic program, and we're currently working with student leaders around the region to expand that program to Park Rose, David Douglas, schools still in Portland, but mostly located in East Portland. I think the Portland Public School District recently conducted a survey of the students to see what the usage rates were for the bus pass, and it was quite high. It was almost 80%, I believe. But what was actually troubling was that there was a percentage, about 15% of students who responded they did not know how they would get to school without Youth Pass. So this is a vital service that deserves expansion.
I might also just note that TriMet also in the last year reduced student fares, youth fares, down to $1.25, which is our lowest discount fare category. So we're trying to encourage that, even in areas, bus ridership, even in areas that don't have the Youth Pass.
Thank you. We'll take another question from a City Club member.
My name is Gerald Fox, member of the City Club. So we're going to build a busway on Powell, and something is certainly needed there. However, it's not clear that some of the ancillary things are actually going to work. If the next earthquake takes out the steel bridge, the light rail system is going to be cut in half indefinitely. While if the 4 miles of missing track along Powell between 205 and the Orange Line were constructed, we would at least have a plan B. I'm not sure how deeply that has been considered. Secondly, one of the reasons that light rail was first built in the 1980s was the growing bus congestion on the Mall. At that time, the Mall was carrying a lot more buses than it does today, and there was concern about where that was going to lead us. How many more buses can fit on the Mall before we recreate that problem? And finally, in Ottawa, an extensive busway system has been built over many years. It's now being scrapped and converted to light rail. Are we in danger of making a strategic mistake here?
So I suspect Vivian will have some things to say about this, but Gerald, to your point, I'm very, actually you made the same points to the TriMet Board of Directors earlier this week, and they're very thoughtful, and I really appreciate you bringing those thoughts to the table. What I would say is that the Powell Division Bus Rapid Transit will not be a busway. It will be short of a busway. It will have, as Vivian described earlier, a number of tools that will allow our bus to perhaps bypass signals or get a head start on the traffic congestion queue that might occur at various places in the corridor. So it's a much lower capital cost investment than a busway from beginning to end. So the cost of building light rail would be extremely high, and I think would somewhat delay the implementation of the service, which I think is desperately needed right now. Regarding the point of seismic stability of the steel bridge, I think that is a really important point that we as a region are going to have to begin to deal with. That's not just TriMet, but other services that use the steel bridge need to deal with that. And candidly, that's not the only bridge that we should be worried about as a region, given the seismic instability of the region that we know, that we've learned about over the last 20 or so years. Related to the Mall, it does have capacity for the bus rapid transit added from Powell Division. We do very complex modeling of the Mall. We use a program called VSIM where we can actually look and see what happens with some randomness thrown into the system to make sure that there's capacity. But I would want to just make the point that as we look at the Southwest Corridor, we're going to have those very same considerations between BRT and LRT. And that's one of the areas where I think when we begin to think about buses coming in from the Southwest Corridor at a very rapid clip, we could run into some problems. And so that's one of the key points of analysis that our friends at Metro will be conducting over the next few months.
In planning the Powell Division project, I currently serve on the steering committee. It's been really impressive to see how robust the community engagement has actually been for this project. This was one of those points early on that folks had to make a decision on, was light rail, or is it going to be bus plus, or is it going to be bus rapid transit? All those options were on the table, and the community members and the steering committee members representing those communities were very clear that the desire was for bus rapid transit for a number of considerations, seismic being one of them. You know, currently if it's a little too hot, a little too cold, you got a rock on the tracks, it can disrupt the entire system. Buses are a little bit more nimble in that way, but also I think it drives at cost as well to kind of reduce the capital construction costs and really invest in service.
So we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Vardavis. I'm a City Club member, and I wanted to say that I was transit dependent until 2 years ago when at the age of 57, I got my first driver's license. So I moved here because of TriMet. I was recruited for a job in the area, and before I moved here, I scoped out TriMet and said, yeah, I don't have to change my lifestyle to move there. So thank you very much for that. My question is about affordability. I'm a middle-class person, so I'm not directly affected by this problem that much, but I really worry. The fares are quite high for TriMet, and obviously the day fare is a pretty good deal for people who are going to be circulating all day long, but $250 for a one-way fare is quite a lot of money. That's the same fare as New York City. among other places. And I'm wondering how TriMet manages the tension between all this investment you want to do and keeping the fares affordable.
One thing that I just might note is that when there is a tension between service and fares. And again, the fare being cheap on a lousy transit system would not be a bargain. So we're looking for that balance. And again, our board of directors puts very deep thought into this and have a very thoughtful fare policy. What I would say is that we also have a fare mitigation program in place that helps for people who are low income. And the other part is we haven't raised the base fare in 4 years. So I think we're showing some sensitivity to that issue. But thank you for your question and for your ridership.
We've run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. This is Greg McPherson, President of City Club. Please join me in thanking Neil McFarlane, General Manager of TriMet, and the rest of our panel. We are adjourned.